Okay, let us go ahead and get going today. We have several exciting things we want to get started with today. First of which is actually talking about the design project that we're going to be following through or along the class. So we'll talk about the project and the overall program for the project and how you want to approach it. And then we'll get back into some more specifics about analysis and how to do some more sort of daylighting and shading and reflection things. We'll get back into some more of the technical side. But I want you to kind of thinking about the overall project so you can start in your mind thinking ahead to really how you want to go through and approach this. Because it actually is, I think, sort of an exciting way of going through and trying to teach the material. We'll go ahead and actually bring up a document, which we should also upload to coursework for you. Let's do that. Oh, that is too big. Well, in that case, let me go ahead and upload a smaller file for you. Just guess get that one for right now. Say that. Try that one.
Hopefully we can make a big deal out of this.
Oops, looks like that one did make it. And then I'll go through and put the second file up there too. Okay. Go ahead and if you can, get out to coursework and download that file. It's Autobahn Arc Central. Okay, as a starting point. And then let me go ahead and get one other file that'll get us going, and that is, where did I put it? Class project overview. There it is. Beautiful. And let's just kind of talk about what's in there. So we want to talk a little about sort of the project that we're going to be using to go ahead and tie together a lot of the materials in class. And talked about it with the TA and the whole teaching team, and we really decided to go through and try a slightly different approach. As opposed to kind of giving you a whole series of separate assignments on each specific little aspect of the class, we decided to start instead with a notion of, could we actually build up a building really from first principles and kind of add in the layers of complexity that you typically run into in a building? So thinking about at a high level kind of the overall form and the envelope and just kind of sort of passive design principles and how they're embodying it. But then going through in successive stages, adding in structure, adding in the MEP systems, adding in the electrical system, adding in the plumbing system, and really just kind of building it up so you sort of see not only the complexity of how all those things work together, but also some of the trade-offs, because really for this building, you are the master of the design. You're going to control all the different aspects. So ultimately, you know, it's all the different trade-offs and how you resolve them are in your control. So it's kind of a good exercise to have to be thinking about those trade-offs and put them into place. So in terms of thinking about the building that we could build, we decided to come up with something along these lines. Here's the overall notion of the program. Think about some sort of a sustainable built environment. I'll call it a living lab and exhibition center. And the idea there is that we really want to have some sort of an exhibit space which is not only kind of exhibits on sustainable built environment principles, but actually in the building itself, you know, exemplifies, it showcases those things. And as you're visiting the center, you actually almost just sort of peel beneath the surface a little bit and understand, really, here's how the gray water harvesting system is working in this building. Here's how rainwater collection is working for this building. So the building itself is like kind of the being part of the lab where exhibits are explaining about what's going on in the building, talking about just general sustainable building design practices and building practices, but we're also trying to illustrate them. So different parts of the building could illustrate different things. If we want to kind of think about, kind of walls that have high thermal mass or radiated, part of the building could have that sort of feature. Some other part could have more of a rain screen or something kind of a lightweight construction. And, you know, so be thinking about an exhibit space that really people will visit. You know, school kids will visit, people who are just sort of interested in green building designs. I'm thinking about incorporating those sort of features into my home could visit there. It could also be like a hub for, you know, just all the a focal point for designers in the Bay Area who are interested in sustainable building practices. They'll get together there in evenings and have their meetings, and yeah, just kind of, you know, it's where the USGBC group could come and meet like once a month or something like that. So living lab, kind of think about it that way. we're going to approach this as a series of different phases in which we'll be developing and enhancing a design and kind of keep on going through with the design. And as we go through and do this, you're going to do an initial design, but that initial design is going to keep on evolving and changing as we keep going. Chances are the things that you put together for the first check-in will kind of keep on changing and progressing. Nothing is ever locked in, and it really is kind of the way most design works. An iterative process, you make some early gestures. As you keep on developing and getting further into it, you may decide to change some of those as you learn a little bit more, and that's all okay. So even in terms of what we're going to be doing here, there is not as much the notion of individual assignments turn in as ultimately you're responsible for developing a project all the way through. And we'll have what we'll call check-ins along the way where at each discrete phase sort of meet with some of the teaching team and the project consultants and you sort of review your work, but we'll all be at different points at those check-ins. By the end of this quarter, we're all going to be through and have a completed building, but everyone's going to be a little bit different about where they are in terms of each of those different check-in points. And that's kind of okay, because it'll all kind of work its way out in the wash. By the end, ultimately you're responsible for getting all the systems done. But in terms of that, as you're coming into a check-in, it's not necessarily important that you have a finished design artifact which is so incredibly beautiful and perfect in all the engineering details, as much as it's kind of the process that you've been using. It's sort of what I sort of considered A and B, and I did this kind of analysis, and B looks a little bit better, but I'm not sure. Let's talk about it. It's really more that it's almost like a series of desk crits or consulting sessions where we're just going to keep on developing it a little bit together. Okay, so as we're going, ultimately you're working towards this final design. But as we're going, we want to actually have you recording your design development process. So we're going to actually set you up with an ability to do a little bit of live blogging to go through and record what you're doing. And if you want to put video snippets in there when you're discussing your design, or you want to put scans or models or whatever it is you want to go ahead and put in there, that's okay. But part of this is actually recording your process, okay, as much as the finished artifact. Because really, in terms of what you're going to be ultimately graded on in the class, it is as much sort of the process and that you're using and the analysis and how well you're using that, as the fact that you finally came up with an elegant and beautiful design. It's really, the process is very important. Okay, we are going to give you a site to work with. TAs have pulled together a site kind of up in the foothills, kind of in the Jasper Ridge area.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll show you that in just a second. Actually, it is now available up on coursework. Is that correct? So if I download this into Revit, I will see the site?
Yes, you
Okay, let me go ahead and take a look and see how well that actually is going to work out. So I will go out to coursework and download that starting point. Let me just kind of download that. Just need to do that. I'm trying to do much more than I need to. Okay, going out to download. You got this Jasper Rib site. Let me go and take a look at it. See what you've put together for us. If I can find. Okay, I'll go out to my downloads folder and see how we did. And okay, Jasper Ridge starting point. Yes.
For some of our computers, we have this FlexNet license finder. Can you explain it? What's the license finder?
Now, if that's happening, it's usually some sort of a network issue because all the machines are licensed. It's like happening to a bunch of you in a row.
Yes.
How about the rest of you back here? Is everyone's having trouble? Okay, that usually indicates that then the license server itself is actually down. And when you try to go ahead and ping, it's like, is it CEE server? I think it's CEE-server.stanford.edu. Because if we're having the problem, I suspect they're having the same problem in the iRoom or something like that. And it must mean that something's down. But if that's the case, we'll sort of follow along today, or not follow along today, we'll watch along. Because yeah, that should be back up again. So if everyone in the room is getting it, how about this? When you run upstairs and just kind of check in the iRoom, do you have access to the iRoom? Can you get in there after hours?
No.
Nah, it should just happen to everyone.
You can check out. Maybe it's open right now. Yeah.
Yeah, what you got?
It's doing the same thing in the I was trying to
Oh.
yesterday.
Okay, so it's the same thing in the iron? Okay, don't feel penalized, it's nothing you're doing, we'll hopefully get it back online, it just means it's a server that's down that needs to be brought back up. Okay, so if you guys, one of you could send a message to, Mark Ramsey? Yeah, send a message to him saying, could you please restart, or like the FlexNet licensing seems to be down on Sci-Fi server, can you try and give that a restart? We'll see if we can get it back online for you. Okay, so nothing you're doing, so don't worry about that. Okay, here is the site that has been pulled together, actually, for you guys, just so everyone sort of understands where this site came from. How did you go ahead and generate this site?
Oh, well, I put it in from Google Earth. So you can put it in using SketchUp and you put it from Google Earth and transfer it into Revit. So for the Jasper site, just get the coordinates and then you put it in.
Excellent. So what we have here is actually there's two different things kind of hanging around in here. There is a DWG file, which is the coordinates or the actual kind of elevations and all that information. Let me go ahead and see if I can close that up. That got pulled in from like Google Earth. And from that, we were actually able to generate this topo surface. So let me see, that's the surface. Let me kind of take that out for a second. Kind of show everyone. Here is the, what is it, kind of 3D point data that comes in from Google Earth. And you can really do this for almost any site, like in the world. And then out of that, we were able to go through and generate this topo surface. Let me kind of bring it back again. Okay, once we have the topo surface, you can get rid of the points. Let me just kind of get rid of that or hide that, because then you just end up with this thing which looks more like a topo surface. And the nice thing about the surface is it's kind of a nice hilly side. The idea is to give you something that's a little bit interesting to work with, as opposed to sort of being on a flat plane, which is kind of boring. Something that has a little bit of hillside that's looking towards the bay and kind of has nooks and valleys. It sort of gives you the opportunity to create a more interesting building, kind of relative to that. So we'll have a site there for which you get started with. We can start either designing the building on the site, or it probably makes sense to start building the building on the site. If I go looking at the site either from the north or the south, what's happening here? Looks like level 1 is right about there and level 2 is right about there. Okay. If you need to move those, we can, in terms of kind of where the base of the site is relative to that. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and put some sort of building on here. So I'm just going to draw it in 3D right now. So in 3D, I'm going to say that I'm going to put some sort of building. I'll make it go from like level 1 to level 2, just as a starting point. Okay, and from that, I can start actually drawing some sort of building. Now as I'm drawing this building, if I rotate it around a little bit, you might see that it's kind of up or down relative to the site. And if that is the case and you want to nestle it down into the site or something like that, that's actually pretty easy to do. What you're actually going to, it's going to sound weird, it's actually easier to move the earth than it is to move your building, because it's just a matter of what your base point of your building is. So if you need to do something like that, you can just rotate it to some view sideways or even to like one of the elevation views. Let me kind of make that just a wireframe so we can see everything. So we get a little notion of sort of the building floating above the cut in the earth. If you actually want that to be down in the earth, you can actually just sort of move the earth and kind of nestle it in or whatever it is. But you'll see there's actually quite a bit of slope in there. And we actually want there to be quite a bit of slope in there because we are intending for you to hopefully have a multi-story building, something that takes advantage of the fact there's a little bit of hill there. Okay, so in terms of that, be thinking about your overall building design, and we'll talk about as a consultant teams, how you can nestle it down in there and really all the things you need to do to kind of make that work nicely for you. So again, like if you start out with a building and it's not nestling just exactly the way you want it, you need a little bit of help for doing that. It's a perfectly valid issue to come bring to us. Like for example, in this case, the slope is kind of coming down, it's kind of filling our building. We actually need to use something called a pad to kind of cut some of that away and like suppress the earth, and we can go through and do that. and we'll give you some guidance about how to go through and do that. But I'd say start thinking about your building and how it might relate to the site, not necessarily worrying about exactly if the model's perfect yet. We'll go ahead and adjust that for you as you need to. So let me just put a pad under there just to kind of illustrate what I mean. I'll just put a pad in here. Pads are very much like floors. Okay, and we'll cut away some earth and it'll all sort of be surrounded there like that. So there's lots of ways to do that. So think creatively about how you can actually take advantage of the hill, where you want to be on that hill. You want to get towards the top or down in the valley, or wherever you need to be. Okay, let's go back over to the assignment for a second. In terms of what you're actually going to be designing on there. Okay, we have this notion of this living lab and exhibition center, and I have some rough guidelines about what the program is, but again, most clients will often bring you some guidelines, and you'll try to design something that sort of fits with that, and you get sort of a negotiation about exactly how many square feet it'll take up, what's going to be required to kind of provide the type of program that you have in mind. Part of your job as a designer is to help interpret it and figure out really what needs to be accomplished. So some of the things we want to make sure are included in there for this to be kind of a good center. It'll probably have some sort of a guest lobby and a welcoming area, a place where people come in and first gather. Maybe there's a reception desk there or something to kind of let people know they've arrived. It's going to have, more than anything, exhibition spaces, and there'll probably be multiple of them, for permanent and temporary exhibits that'll kind of swap in and swap out. So there could be different exhibit areas illustrating different things. There could be one exhibit area which is all about solar power and how we can capture solar power in different ways, and have some meters and LCD screens and things that illustrate those sorts of principles. There might be a whole separate area that's all about rainwater and what it means to go ahead and interact with that. So think about, it's not necessarily like one big voluminous auditorium space. There's probably smaller spaces where, they're probably big enough for a class of 15 people to come and gather and kind of learn about an exhibit. Okay, but you don't necessarily want to be in this gigantic hall. It'd be nice to also have a couple of educational spaces or seminar rooms. That's kind of just a nice thing so that people can go ahead and take some classes or sort of catch up on some specific technology. I saw the exhibit all about, solar radiation and how we can capture it. I want to go to a class that really explains some of the principles and how I can use them on my own home. Okay. It's probably like a large conference room, meeting room for bigger things, and large, something that holds 16 people, or it doesn't have to be huge, but something that would hold a reasonably large board. Okay, we good? There's going to be some offices for the center director, the administrative staff, and the volunteers, and the docents, people who actually help out in the center. Some space for their work off the floor. We'd like to have some sort of a visitor cafe, a little bit of food preparation, and some guest seating. Okay, not a full restaurant, but a little bit. You can sort of see how big a cafe-like thing is. You look at Koopa or even Ike's or something like that. There's a certain amount of space that it takes for some basic cooking equipment to kind of get sandwiches out there. It's not full sit-down dinners. It's more kind of light things that people might sit down, and a space for them to sit down and relax and kind of eat. It would also be nice to have a little bit of gift shop area where some books, education materials, just things like that. You've learned a little bit, you want to sort of follow up. There's some things you can actually sort of pick up and take home with you. Videos, DVDs. Okay. Also, going to be some storage space and some utility space. We'll learn to start thinking about this in terms of all of our buildings that, just all that mechanical, electrical equipment, it takes up space. You need to provide space for that. And you don't tend to think about that. But it actually needs to be provided for, and we think about where it wants to be located in the building. Stairs to get between the levels, some restrooms on each level. It's kind of a rough idea of the design space, but sort of get a sense of this space and the types of things that it might involve. Because what I wanted to do is actually show you kind of another model of a space like this that might give you some starting points to start thinking about what you'll be designing. And I was going to do that by actually sort of opening up this other file that I put out on the file server for you, and that is the Audubon Center. So let's go ahead and open that one up for just a second. Actually, I think I have it open in the background right now. Since you won't follow along, let me just open this. Okay. The Audubon Center was sort of another sort of idea of sort of a center all about kind of understanding nature. This is really more about birds and wildlife. And this plan I put out there really just to give you some ideas of really what a space like this could look like. Yeah, your space doesn't have to look like this, doesn't have to look anything like this, but just to give you an idea of how some people approach a program like that. And if we go looking at the space, let's see if we can sort of unpack it a little bit. Like one thing I can do in this space, I can go ahead and look at the floor plans. So if I look at sort of the equipment and furniture plan, there's a really fully developed set of documents here. There's a lot of information here about a catering kitchen, all sorts of different things that are available here. But let's see if we can sort of unpack it just by looking at it in 3D. See if we can get a sense of how big these spaces are and how you might want to do it. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this 3D model and I'm going to turn on something called the section box, which will let me sort of clip off the top plane. I'm just going to peel off the roof so we can look inside. Because that's kind of a nice way of just sort of understanding. I think it's easy to make things understandable that way. I can turn on the section box, which looks kind of anticlimactic at first. And then with that section box, let me kind of roll back out. It's being a little slow to respond to me. Please zoom back in again. Okay. I can take that section box and you'll see these little blue arrows on the different sides. I can basically push down on those arrows and that'll just cut away parts of the building to let me see inside. So if I kind of push on down far enough, that's a little too far. Now I'm just over the roof right there. Not quite far enough. Well, let's try it a little further still. Come on, you. What's happening is as I'm pushing around, I'm not getting the handle on the box. I'm getting the handle on some object in the background. See if I can get this. Okay, there we go. So here's kind of a space. Let's take a look at it and see if we can figure out really what all's going on here. Because it's actually kind of an interesting space the way they've designed this. Let me even sort of orbit it around a little bit. See if we can figure this out. Okay, so if I start over on, let's even start on sort of with this whole notion of where the entrance to the building is. The way this building is organized is the entrance to the building is actually here in sort of the central gallery. And in the central gallery space, there's some doors that come in from the outside. In the central gallery space, so there's a little bit of a reception area, a counter where you can check people in and do things like that. Okay. And the way it's sort of divided in this space is there's sort of educational functions on this side. There's a cafe area over here. There's sort of administrative offices and some of the back-end functions kind of happening down this hallway over here. So in terms of what's going on in the space, you've got the big central lobby and greeting area. Educationally, they have it set up so that the classrooms are over here, just a little bit different from what's happening on this side. They have these classrooms. They actually have sort of interesting design features in here. In that, there's sort of this more central open space, which could be used as part of the exhibits. Then they have these spaces that actually have these big sliding doors that can be closed off. So I'm imagining this is a classroom, that's a classroom, that might be a seminar room. The nice thing about walls, think about things that could be moved and changed. That way, depending upon whether you want to combine into a large space or separate it off for a private class, you have the ability to kind of reconfigure the space. But this is what I really sort of think about as the sort of the public side of the house. It's kind of nice that way, in that when you come in this way and someone's sitting here greeting people, you have a pretty good view of everything going on here, and people aren't wandering back down to the director's office. They're kind of sitting in this sort of very public zone, access to the patio on the outside. So it's kind of interestingly laid out. As we continue our tour of this space, let's take a look over here. See if I can pan that around a little bit. Just beyond kind of the main public lobby. It's this larger space, which is really like a big cafeteria. And if you start looking at the plans, let me turn on the furniture. Maybe that'll make it a little bit easier to see what's going on. I'm going to go visibility graphics and just turn on the furniture for you. That always helps. Okay, so you can sort of see those classroom spaces over there. Here we have this big dining area in terms of what's going on. Over here, embedding the back in there is kitchen equipment, things like that. So it's a little bit of food preparation, maybe some of the storage. Maybe I'll turn some of that on. I'll go visibility graphics. That's usually called specialty equipment. Let me see if I can make that happen too. Nope, that's already turned on. What else could it be? Don't know right offhand. Okay. As we head on back down the hall the other direction, you'll see that right off the main lobby, there's this like sort of glassed-in sort of bookstore, kind of gift shop sort of area, some shelves, a little bit of space in there. Looks like there's some sort of a meeting room back in here. I think this is called node model and observation. It's got a lot of glass and it's a little bit of viewing area, I think they call it, heading out that way. But then as we start heading down the hallway this way, we start having different offices for the different administrative officers and functions, a little meeting room for them. Okay. You also have some restrooms inside that are accessible for the public during here. It's kind of an interesting building in that it also has some restrooms actually set up on the outside too. So this isn't necessarily part of our program, but just to sort of understand what they did. We got some restrooms set up here, so even when the center is closed after hours, there's some restrooms for the general public to use. And it's just kind of a nice feature. They have a little bit of garage space in this in terms of ultimately being able to park some things, bring in equipment, bring in exhibits and things like that. Again, we're not necessarily asking for that. You know, in the center of the space right here, they actually have some spaces dedicated to electrical equipment, mechanical equipment, some things like that. So, yeah, it's worthwhile looking at this just to get a sense of how a building like this might be organized. But again, don't feel beholden or that you're enslaved to this general design. You go ahead and kind of change it to be what you want to be. But your site's a little bit different, your program's a little bit different. But that's just sort of there, it's just food for thinking about how it's all together. An interesting aspect of this building is that like all the other layers are actually available to you too. So the structure, the mechanical, the electrical, all those plans are actually pretty well developed in this, so you can take a look at those too, understand really how it's all put together. But at the high level is what we want to get started with. So what we would like to do is just have you thinking about this building. You come back over here in that general program. And then for design phase one, actually just think about, you know, for your first check-in, it's really about the overall form of the building to meet the program requirements. So really, you know, how are you going to sort of organize and block out the spaces? Not necessarily in great detail. You won't have every wall and door and window in, but even if you thought about just drawing big rectangles or big non-rectangles to sort of be those different sizes and shapes of spaces, how are you going to organize it? Just kind of pull it all together. So think about the overall form and where things might be. And then think a little bit about the whole notion of the building envelope and the facade. And then really, you know, how you're actually starting to think about things like, just as you organize this whole building, you know, what are you thinking about relative to you and the climate and how the sun's hitting the building, how the wind's hitting the building? You know, where are those opportunities for, you know, operable windows to bring in natural ventilation? You know, what are we all thinking about in terms of the window to wall ratios in different walls? And where do you want windows for view? Where do you want windows for energy? Where you don't want them? Here are the exhibits. And some of your materials choices, you know, relative to this whole notion of conducting the heat or radiating or even having thermal mass. Just, you know, how you want to start thinking about approaching that overall facade of the building, stuff like that. So again, for next week, which is when we're actually going to go ahead and check in for the first time, and for the first part of class, we'll really be just meeting. You know, we'll break the overall class into smaller groups, and you know, I'll take 3 or 4 people, Rob will take 3 or 4 people, Lottie will take 3 or 4 people. Kind of break apart, kind of talk about the different projects in that smaller group. Just kind of compare strategies. So for that, you know, no one's expected to come in with a fully developed floor plan and all that kind of stuff. But if you just started making progress down this path, kind of thinking about 3,000, 4,000 square feet, I need to divide it into these functions. Really, what does the block diagram look like? And what are my opportunities to go ahead and use the natural environment to go ahead and introduce some good features to the building. That's really where we're going. So we're interested in seeing your initial design concepts, kind of your strategies you considered, and really these sorts of analyses and simulations that led you or influenced you to your first design recommendations. So this isn't so much about coming in with a one right answer. It's like coming in with a couple different alternatives and really why you thought A was better than B, how you might approach that. So, I don't know, let's just stop there for a second and talk about that. A little open-ended, a little ambiguous, but then again, a lot of architectural design and building design is a little bit ambiguous, but with that, let's stop and give you a chance to ask some questions and think about how you're going to approach this between now and next Tuesday. So as we lay this all out, how's that resonating with you, or what sort of things are popping in your mind that have you worried about what you're going to do between now and next Tuesday? So let's see if we can start addressing some of those.
So
Yes?
You said we don't have to have a complete floor plan. Are you still, I'm so confused, do you still want a floor plan in Revit, or just drawings, on paper?
It could really be either. I think you can get into kind of doing some things like in the computer modeling tools that are diagrammatic, which might actually be helpful. So let me kind of illustrate how you might want to approach it. So for example, even in a tool like Revit, let's go ahead and do this. I'll go back over there. Just kind of open up a new file. Start with the architectural template. Okay, so let's start at the highest level. You need to go through and create a building that's somewhere around 3,500 to 4,000 square feet. Okay, so that's a good starting point. Let's think about that. So for something like that, if you don't actually want to create literal forms, one of the best ways to go through and create them is actually by creating these things we call masses, which are just sort of shapes that we'll assume to go ahead and have form, we'll add form to later. So we can create just little building blocks to start working with. For example, I can create some masses, and let me call this my overall form, and just start sketching out a shape. So I'm not sure exactly what I have in mind, but I think it might have a shape that looks like this. And again, don't worry about this because I'm going to change it up in just a second. At level 1. Okay, that's kind of my sketch of what the outer boundary might look like. I can make a form out of that. Show that to you in 3D. Okay, it's looking a little bit tall. Okay, there, my building's not very big. That's 50 feet tall right now. Well, I'm going to say it's probably about 12 feet tall instead. Okay, and even with that little bit, I know a little about the form in terms of really how many square feet it has, things like that. So, for example, if I finish that little basic building block, I can say that it actually has, well, it doesn't have floor area. It has a certain amount of surface area and volume. Let me give it some floor area. If I want to give it floor area, what we do is we take that mass and we put something called a mass floor in it. And that actually gives you square footage. So I can take that thing. Let's put a floor at level 1. Okay, and now I know, so far that floor area is right around 7,600 square feet. Okay, so about twice as big as the building needs to be. So let's start paring it down a little bit. Okay, 4,900 square feet. Okay, what do I got now? It's about 4,400 square feet. Yeah, it's enough to get started. That really, at its highest level is the start of what the outside of the building could look like. But let's go ahead and take it one step further now. Okay, so, if the overall form might be something like that, let's go a little bit further in the whole exercise. We could say that, okay, if we actually want to go ahead and make a 2-story structure and we want to start allocating space to different functions. if I am going to, for example, let's think about some of these different rooms that we might want to sort of put together. So for example, let's think about some of the spaces that are definitely allocated. Like as you go start thinking about an office space for the center director, the administrator, and the volunteers, docents, and stuff like that, to pick for them. How many square feet might an office be? So what's a good size for an office? Again, there's sort of, making stuff up as we go, but you have to start with something. So what might be sort of a good size for an office floor, like someone who works day in and day out? How many feet wide, how many feet deep?
100 square feet.
Okay, 100 square feet is pretty good. So if we say that our office is, we're going to allocate about 100 square feet. No worries. How about for these education spaces, these seminar rooms? How big is a good room? Is the size of this room a good room for like in a seminar room, or should it be a little bit different, bigger or smaller? What do you think? If we wanted to hold 30 people in there. Pretty good. Okay, how big is this room? There's always the tough one. The trick is you can count the ceiling tiles. That always works. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 20 feet that way. These ceiling tiles are all 2 feet by 2 feet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. If I counted right, about 34. So seminar 20 by 34. So what's that? That's telling me that somewhere in there, maybe 700 square feet. I should get a better marker than that. Maybe something around 700 square feet for each of those. Okay, so how can you actually start using this information? The idea is, as you start to think about these different spaces and almost dividing up your budget, you're going to have a little bit of budget for the cafe, a little budget for the gift shop, things like that. To actually go back and start thinking about those as almost blocks that you can assemble. This is just one approach. There's a lot of different approaches to how you can start dividing up the space. So, for example, let me go ahead and create a mass, which represents, each of those different offices. Okay, and what am I going to do? I'm just going to draw some sort of shape. And I can make that something like, hang on, I'm trying to get that one side. 10 feet. By 10 feet that way. Okay, if I grab that little guy over there, and I say make him a form, see how big that is? 4 feet tall. That didn't look very good. A little tall and skinny, but it'll work. Okay, I basically have something that's my office module now, and with that office module, no worries. Zoom out. What I'm going to start doing is almost playing with those like Lego. For example, I can copy and say, I'd like another one here. And like another one here. And maybe for this last one, it'll be here. But I'm going to offset it a little bit so I can take it and I can move it. And maybe because, this is the one I'm thinking about being the director's office on the end, it's even a little bit bigger. Whatever it is happens in there. So what you can almost start thinking about doing is, I'm going to rotate this back up, it's almost like building with blocks, just starting to stack and assemble the different blocks, and really sort of see if you can come up with a form for it. Yeah, in the same sort of sense, these seminar rooms, they're going to be about 20 by 34. So what do I want to have happen there? In the same sense, I could go through and create a mass. And that same sort of thing, I'll make something that's, like 20 by 34 or thereabouts. choose that, make a form out of that, make that 12 feet tall. Maybe they even have to be taller. But I can start blocking these things all together. And the cool thing about these blocks is as I make them, I can stack them and do things like that. I can also sort of stack them vertically if I want to. There's no harm in doing that. So if I want to go through and take something like this, and let's see if I can make this work. Go that. See if I can get it up there. There we go. Stacked up on top of there. Oops, now I take that back. I want to be able to stack them. That's the deceptive part about doing things in like 2D and 3D. Let me do this. Let me undo this. How about to get it up to the second level, let me just copy it. I'm going to paste it a line to level 2 instead. Actually, then that way we'll put it up on top. That's another way to do it. But don't be afraid to kind of really use whatever strategy works for you, whether you're a sketcher and you sort of subdivide, or whether you assemble Lego blocks and build up that way. Whatever it is, it will start to sort of give you a sense of what the overall form is. Because really, at the end of next week, you know, it's sufficient for us to really sort of understand what the overall form is in terms of how these blocks are kind of being assembled. And then to really go through and think about things like, oh, you know, if it is that we're going to go through and kind of slope up the roof and do something interesting over there, and maybe we'll slope up this roof and do something like that. Yeah. It's okay to understand the building in terms of those really simple forms. And then really think about, for each of these different surfaces, you know, which of those you're thinking about as being lazy? Which of those are you thinking about as being solid surfaces? And yeah, just how is this all going to be approaching the whole notion of just really, you know, sunlight's hitting it, what temperature performance is going to be like, you know, where are the opportunities for ventilation? So you can leave it at this level. You can start saying, hey, I started my understanding in terms of like trending it this way. But even for next week, if you just have this translated into something like this. Okay, so I got my basic little block form over here. Let me copy that. I'll do this, I'll copy it that way. Kind of pull it over here. Because this is all just sort of design exploration. I'm just, you know, don't think about your model so literally. It's really can just be your sketchboard. Those things. So as I start thinking about different walls and surfaces, you can take forms like this and actually do kind of cool things to them. For example, you can say, hey, I want to make a wall out of, oops, let me say by face. I can take a wall and actually just choose that face and make those into real wall surfaces. Or if I prefer that wall over there to be a curtain wall, I can make it into a curtain wall or something like that. But you know, it's pretty easy to take that basic shape and start transferring the elements. But at this first level, we're really just sort of interested in the high level, which, you know, really what that overall shape and form is. The task is really just to come back with some shape and form that somehow addresses the total amount of space with some understanding of how you're going to break up the space within there. Does that sort of make sense? Okay, other questions? Let's see, because it's really, I think a lot of questions will come up when you start diving into it. Let's see if we can head off some in terms of how you're going to approach it. Yes?
To do a blog, is there like a required platform or format to use or anything? Or?
We're gonna set it up so that it's really it's like simple HTML editing. It's basically you edit it in kind of like plain text and then it kind of shows up. So it's gonna be it's in Joomla, which is the underlying kind of tool for doing it. But I'll show you how to go through and do that to record all that stuff. It's basically you're just gonna have a section and then just gonna post articles. So it's really, oh, you know, today I tried blah blah blah. Here's a couple images of it. You know, I'll pop it in there. Just kind of keep up with the live journal. You know, it's not like an everyday diary exercise, as much as it is, you know, if you plug it away on things, just sort of record your progress. Questions? No questions. More questions will come, no doubt. And so go ahead and dive into it. What's going to happen is the illustrious teaching team is going to go ahead and post some sort of consulting hours to kind of like give you an opportunity to come in and ask some questions between now and next Tuesday and stuff like that. So between now and next Tuesday, go ahead and make some sort of good faith effort to actually like take it to a first level of something that gives us something to talk to you about. Okay. Don't worry about actually having a completed design, and don't get incredibly wedged in the details, because as we start building this out, we're going to keep on learning a lot of things in terms of egress and hallways, and the design is going to keep on changing and like evolving as we go. So if you prefer to sketch and take pictures of scans, that's fine. Whatever it is, you're going to capture your design and give us something to work with you, in terms of capturing your sort of initial design idea. From there we'll go. Make sense? Okay. It is a journey. It's going to be a continuing journey, and the more you think about it up front, hopefully the better it'll be and the more fun for you later on. Yeah.
As far as the like square footage, is that for like the total square foot? Like you have like 2 stories as well, or is it like the footprint of the buildings?
It's intended to be the usable area. Well, let's even talk about that. Let's give you some general guidance about that. Yeah, there's the usable area, and then there's actually the total area of a building. Let's talk about that. And a very good concept that you bring up is the whole notion of the footprint of the building. And these are all things that sort of come up. Let's talk about usable area. If I go through and tell you that I want 4,000 square feet of usable area, that's actually real useful area. That's the space where I can park my desk and work in and do all of those, kind of things, the actual functions of the building. For a typical building, do you have any sense of really what the amount of actual total area is relative to the usable area? And what tends to get added into total areas, it's everything else. It's all those hallways, and all those stairways, and restrooms, and utility spaces, and stuff like that. They don't actually count in the usable area. So if you need 4,000 square feet of usable area, about how much real total square footage do you think you need? What do you think the overage is? Yeah.
Is it like 40%?
It could easily be. Yeah, exactly. This is typically like 30 to 40%. 30 is actually pretty lean. So if I'm telling you 4,000 square feet, by the time you really stack it all up, okay, you may have, another like 1,200 to 1,600 square feet in there. Okay, so your total building is probably much closer to 5,200 to 5,600 square feet. Okay, and that's okay. That's why I'm saying in terms of the square footage requirement, be soft on that, because depending on how you do it, and whether you have a lot of interior hallways, or you have exterior arcades, or there's some flexibility in terms of how big that number is going to be. But I'm saying 4,000 square feet. I just want you to know that it's not 50,000 square feet, and it's not 1,000 square feet. It's somewhere in the middle. It's kind of like a large house, something like that. Okay. So we'll see how that works in terms of allocating the space, and you may come back and tell me, hey, there's no way I can get all this stuff in 4,000 square feet. At which point we'll negotiate about it. We can say, how much do we need? Okay, so there's total versus usable. Watch out for that issue. Footprint is another great issue. Let's talk about that. Because if we took this amount of space and we just divided it in half and we had a perfectly vertical building, okay, and we stacked everything up, that would mean that we are going to have about 2,600 square feet, to 2,800, something like that, as a building footprint. And that's actually another sort of interesting way of looking at things. Planning people make us look at it that way. There's lots of variations on that. Okay. If you have a building, I'm drawing in section now, that looks like this. Okay, so perfectly stacked, gets easy to go through and calculate that. Where it gets interesting is when you have buildings that look like this. Then all of a sudden, the footprint is actually here to here. It's almost like if the sun was at noon, okay, pointing straight down in the sky, what is the shadow of the building would cast? Okay, so some people have us go through and define it that way. Just so you know, we're not holding you to a requirement on that. When you talk about building footprint, there's lots of different ways of approaching that. Or even, there's the buildings that, it's big on the bottom, it's smaller on the top, and you have a little bit of a balcony and a patio and all sorts of things in there. Again, it's typically by the shadow of the building, something like that. So, you don't have to necessarily divide that evenly between the two different spaces. In fact, the good building probably doesn't have it evenly divided because as you're working with a hillside, it might be kind of interesting to go ahead and have something that has some interesting terracing. Or, it's a nice natural wildlife area. You have fantastic views of the bay. You have some outdoor observation areas that get you out of the building. And it'd be really, really cool to think about spaces that have a little bit of an indoor-outdoor quality to them. So that on nice days we can actually fold open all that glass or fold open all those doors and actually kind of bring the outdoor in some more. That would probably make sense for a building like this to kind of have more of that experience. Okay, so just start thinking about how you're going to divide up the space. And then relative to these things, as you're thinking about just the different surfaces, the ones on the north, south, east, and west, you think about, is this going to be a big glazed surface? Is this going to be more of a solid surface? Just think about how you want to approach that. Because, this building probably won't have like massive curtain walls on 4 sides and be a big glass box. It's going to be some kind of combination of kind of solid versus very light, kind of energy capturing versus view, like some of those different things. So start thinking about your concepts, and then really as you develop your concepts, it'll give us something to talk about relative to like, the pluses and minuses of some of the different features. Okay, generally make sense? Okay, let's stop there and just give you guys a chance to kind of just roll that over and think about how you're going to approach it. But a lot of questions will come up. The other thing we need to do, Raj, remind me of that, let's set up the Piazza site tonight so we can have a little bit of a discussion forum for you. So as you ask questions, everyone can benefit from your questions and the answers to them. Okay.